Genesis 16, the birth of Ishmael. Genesis 16 and Genesis 17 are chapters with two different themes. You could say Genesis 16 is about man trying to solve problems according to his way, and ends up with a bad result. And then chapter 17 is man following God's way to address issues, and that is what restores people to the proper path. So let's learn about Ishmael. Chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. All right, so we're just reminded of the issue that was brought up in chapter 15 with Abraham, is the fact that he's being promised these descendants, but his wife has no kids. She had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my maid. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So another similarity between Adam and Eve. Abram is listening to the voice, the suggestions of Sarai, his wife, just like Adam listened to Eve, and it's not going to have a good consequence. So after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. So man's trying to intervene. He does this by polygamy, and it's not that Abram's act of polygamy is justifying polygamy, but if you're reading and following the story, you realize that this is something bad. We're breaking away from the man, one woman that was established in the garden. Verse 4, and he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. All right, so now there's internal family strife. The slave thinks she's better than the wife of Abram because now she has kids. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my maid to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt." If you think Sarai is, dare I say, being irrational here, you would be right. And I'll just end the commentary on that. She looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. Verse 6. But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. So Hagar is still Sarai's slave. So Sarai deals harsh with her, probably beats her, and Hagar decides that she needs to get away. Verse 7. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, maid of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" So the angel addresses her as a maid of Sarai, all right? And again, when like an angel or God is asking a question, it's really for the benefit of the person hearing the question. It's a loaded question. It's a teaching question. And the lesson is, Hagar, like, you are part of Abram's family because of your mistress Sarai. You are part of this covenant that God has established because you are connected to this family. Abandoning this family is not going to be where your success or where your salvation is going to lie. All right, similar to how Lot really should never have left Abram. Same thing here with Hagar. Fleeing is doing the wrong thing. She said, "I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your descendants that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing," for she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him?" Therefore the well was called Be'er Laharoi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Chapter 17. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, "I am God Almighty." All right, so what does it mean that God is Almighty? It means he can pull off anything, he can do anything. And Abram and Sarai have been doubting God's power to pull off his covenant for them. So God reminds them, "I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you and will multiply you exceedingly." Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him. So verse 3, it's another framing device. Go ahead and connect it over to verse 17. In verse 17, Abram falls on his face and laughs again. So in oratory traditions, this is like natural bookends, natural chapters. So Abram fell on his face, verse 3, and God said to him, "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you." All right, promise of the covenant, and you get that covenantal language, between me and you. "And your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. And I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojourning, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." And God said to Abram, "As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you." Keep underlining that so you're getting familiar with this covenantal language and that you're able to recognize it later. "And your descendants after you, every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He that is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised. Every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring, both he that is born in your house and he that is bought with your money shall be circumcised." So, circumcision is being instituted. Circumcision is not a good or pleasant thing, but it's going to become the sign of the covenant. And there's a lot of parallels between circumcision and and baptism, and also the cross. So, like, we have crucifixes in every room in this school. However, if you think about it, crucifixion is not a pleasant thing. It's an execution by torture. Okay, execution by suffocation and torture. It's not inherently this positive image. Okay, however, it is the source of our salvation, right? And baptism is very much so connected with the death and resurrection of Christ, right? The reason why it's water in baptism is water is lethal, but it's also life-giving. You can be drowned in water, but it's also essential for life. The cross it's an instrument of torture, but it's also our means of attaining eternal life. Circumcision is initially, it is an Egyptian practice. All right, so circumcision originated with the Egyptians. And what we've seen so far about the Egyptians is that they're a bunch of polygamists. And so what God is saying to Abraham, all right, Abraham, you're going to act like an Egyptian. I'm going to make you walk like an Egyptian as well, okay? You took an Egyptian maid to become a polygamist, just like Pharaoh was a polygamist. All right. But what God's doing, though, is it's going to become the sign of the covenant. All right. this thing that has a negative connotation is going to be the means towards people's salvation. So that if you're going to enter into Abraham's covenant now, you need to be circumcised to be a member of his family. All right, the same way that like to become a part of the church, you have to enter into Christ's death, but also his resurrection. So this thing of negativity is going to become the pathway to salvation. All right, so think of like Christ would tell his followers, unless you pick up your cross and follow me, you have no part in me. God's telling Abraham, unless you're circumcised, they'll have no part in this covenant that I'm establishing with you. Verse 14. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Verse 15. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abram fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live in your sight. God said, no, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. Underline that promise in verse 19, because it's going to set up the drama in the coming chapters. God is explicitly promising to Abraham that this covenant will be passed on through Isaac. You may already be familiar with the story of Abraham's being told to sacrifice Isaac. We'll get to that in Genesis 22. But this promise from God is setting up the drama of that story. Yes?
So you said that usually when covenant, like when this happens, they come in sevens. So how come in this chapter there are 9 of them, or 10 of them, instead of 7?
There's covenant. The word covenant's used 10 times in this chapter, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Can't answer that. Also, remember the chapters are superimposed on the text. They're not original to the text. So just because a number appears in a chapter a certain amount of times doesn't actually matter too much, probably, to the author's original intent. But you would want to do, if you want to do more in-depth analysis, you'd look at between the framing devices that we're identifying. But as for like the exact numerology, I do not know. You might, if you want to, I don't know how many times it's in here, but you might want to count how many times is it between you and me against other like covenantal language. How many times is that appearing? Verse 20. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him and make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. He shall be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year. When he had finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son and all the slaves born in his house and bought with his money every male among the men of Abraham's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin that very day, as God had said to him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. That very day Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised, and all the men of his house, those born in the house and those bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. All right, so all of Abraham's family is being part of this covenant, and it's an extended family. It's like an entire household. So I mentioned those 5 covenants in the Old Testament. Adam is an individual. Noah, a family, is saved. Now you get to Abraham, it's an entire household. It's not just an immediate family, but like everyone who's considered part of the estate is part of this covenant. Yes, along.
Sorry, my mom's dropping something off. Can I go grab her?
Sure. Chapter 18. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Marm, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men stood in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree while I fetch a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So this is God and 2 angels. Some commentaries see this as like an early revelation of the Trinity, but it's either God and he's being accompanied by 2 angels, and we're going to see the 2 angels later on. They're going to be the ones that go off and destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So they said, do as you have said, verse 6. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. All right, make a note at the end of this paragraph to Exodus chapter 23, verse 19. In Exodus 23, verse 19, part of the law of Moses is that you can't eat a calf along with its mother's milk. And what's interesting here is Abraham's feeding God a non-kosher meal. He's giving him calf with milk. Okay, so like for Orthodox Jews, they're not going to eat cheeseburgers because you can't be doing, it's against the law of Moses to be mixing cow meat with milk. All right, and the reason why that's in the law of Moses is it has to do with the fact that a lot of pagan rituals would be like to get really weird with the idea of like, we're going to boil a child in its own mother's milk. And that's like fertility juice or something, was their worldview. And so that's why the law of Moses puts a ban on it, because they don't want, Moses and God doesn't want the Israelites acting like the stinking pagans around them. So they just say, no one is going to be eating cow meat with its mother's milk, okay? So the reason I point that out is because Abraham's a figure of righteousness, pre-law of Moses, pre-kosher requirements, all these things that Christians don't do anymore. And it's part of the theology that St. Paul makes in the New Testament. As to why Christians don't have to be circumcised. But you can understand after reading the previous chapter why a lot of Jews would be concerned about needing to be circumcised before being baptized, because God just said, if you're not circumcised, you're cut off from this covenant. Right? And that's the tension of the theology debate going on in the 1st century, which we will get to in the spring. Verse 9, they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, She is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you in the spring, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, Shall I have, after I've grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abram, Why did Sarah laugh and say, Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? So Sarah's doubting, and God's calling her out on her doubt. And this is another instance of Sarah doubting, because when Sarah was handing Hagar over to Abraham, that was also an instance of Sarah doubting. So Abraham consistently believes, and it's reckoned to him as righteousness. But he does listen to Sarah and he takes Hagar, right? So he has a slip up. But Sarah is consistently always in a state of doubt over these things. So God says to her, Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you in the spring, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And imagine God saying to you, no, you did laugh. I know. Okay. So then she gets held to task. No, but you did laugh. Verse 16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him. No, for I have chosen him that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry which has come to me, and if not, I will know. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. So God is promising that for the sake of the righteous, the wicked will be spared. The problem with Sodom and Gomorrah is that there aren't actually any righteous people in there. Why is Abraham concerned? He's concerned because that's where Lot is living. Okay, back when Lot separated from Abraham, he went and he dwelt in the valleys between Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abraham's concerned about his cousin. And also, this is a really pivotal moment in salvation history because Abraham he doesn't know what God is going to do. There is no Baltimore Catechism that Abraham is brought up with. Abraham did not go to CCD classes. Okay? God is revealing himself, an aspect of his justice. God is revealing an aspect of his mercy to humanity in this moment. And that's why this conversation is so important. Verse 27, Abraham answered, behold, I have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again, he spoke to them and said, suppose 40 are found there. He answered, for the sake of the 40, I will not do it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, behold, I have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, for the sake of the 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So notice at the beginning, Abraham makes the approach to God. And Abraham's this whole time saying like, okay, I'm taking this risk. I may as well, I'm already talking to you. What if there's, 45? What if there's 30? When you get to the end of the conversation, you find that God was the one in control of that conversation the whole time. When God has finished speaking, God's ending the conversation. God has been doing this conversation with Abraham specifically to reveal himself. And, Abraham's worried about Lot. They get down to 10, and God goes his way, and he's leaving it for Abraham to figure out on his own, do you think I'm going to kill Lot with the rest of Sodom and Gomorrah? Based off this conversation we've just had about how I'm going to spare the righteous, and I'm going to be just, and I'm not going to kill them off with the wicked. We're ending the conversation at 10. You make the act of faith as to what's going to happen with Lot. Chapter 19, verse 1. Okay. You can make a note, actually. So at the end of chapter 18, do make a note to chapter 19, verse 29. Chapter 19, verse 29. All right, and now we'll continue with chapter 19, verse 1. The two angels, all right, so you get a reference that these, the two other men who were accompanying God with Abram, but they are angels. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, turn aside, I pray you, to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and get the heck out of here." Okay? Lot sees these two guys coming, entering the city, and he says, "Oh no, there's two travelers coming here. This is not the place for two grown men travelers to be. Guys, get in my house ASAP." And you can contrast Abraham's hospitality and generosity with the hospitality that they're going to find at Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah. They said, "No, we will spend the night in the street." Verse 3, but he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." And this is not a cocktail social that they're asking for, okay? Know them. What verse are we at? 6? 6, thanks. All right, verse 6. Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have two daughters who have not known man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Don't violate my virtue of hospitality, but please violate my daughters instead." If that sounds like not the best solution, it's not. And you'll see Lot will get his just desserts for that in the next chapter. But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he would play the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door. But the men put forth their hands and brought Lot into the house to them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves groping for the door. Also, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, you're going to get another parallel with the Genesis chapter 6 through 9 account with the destruction of the earth and Noah's salvation. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So Lot is kind of just like a really mediocre character, right? He's not listening to the directions. He's taking his sweet time. And he's not being prompt about the coming destruction. All right. So while there's similarities to like the account of Noah, Lot is clearly a couple pegs substantially below Noah's character. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. All right. So Lot already doesn't deserve this salvation because he's not listening and taking heed. But God is going out of his way to be merciful to him and to his family. And they brought him forth and set him outside the city. And when they had brought them forth, they said, "Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed. And Lot said to them, Oh, no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. I can't flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, yonder city is near enough to flee to, and it's not a little one. Let me escape there. It is not a little one, and my life will be saved. Who wants to live in the hills in the wilderness? Can I just hang out in another town next door? All right. Again, it's not exactly getting with the program or following the directions here. He said to him, Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Make haste, escape there, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zor. Zor means little one. So because Lot was saying, hey, look at that little city over there. Can I go to that little place? And that day, it got the name of the little one, Zor. The sun had risen on the land when Lot came to Zor. All right, so now we get to the flood analogy. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, not a flood, but brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley, and beheld. And behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities that Lot dwelt in. So the whole reason the slacker Lot is being saved is because of Abraham. Lot, he's not being diligent. He's not following directions. Why is he still saved? It's because God remembers Abraham. Because Abraham, in his conversation with God in the previous chapter, the whole point was actually Abraham interceding on behalf of Lot. So through the covenant that God has with Abraham, others are being saved. Verse 30, we get the shameful origins of the Moabites and the Ammonites. So this is where Lot gets his just deserts. He offered his daughters to the men of to the Sodomites, and now his daughters are gonna have their revenge, so to speak. And you're also gonna get similar with Noah, where Noah gets drunk, and there's some weird sin about like apparent nakedness. We're gonna get another character getting drunk, and then a weird sin with apparent nakedness. Verse 3, Now Lot went up out of Zor and dwelt in the hills, and his two daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zor. Turns out that little place wasn't so great, so he should have just listened to the angels in the first place. So he went and dwelt in a cave with his two daughters. Verse 31, And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Probably good to read. There's not a man in the land to come into us after the manner of all the land. Come, let us make our father drink wine, parallel to Noah, and we will lie with him that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. And on the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lay with him, that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him. And he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. The Moabites and the Ammonites are two of Israel's sworn enemies that they're constantly going to be at war with. All right, so the enemies of Israel, are conceived through this shameful act of incest. Which, if you're following the parallels in the narratives, it kind of gives credence to the theory about Ham's sin being something more than just laughing at his dad. All right, since there's drunkenness and like parental incest going on. Chapter 20. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. All right, so chapter 20 is like a repeat of chapters 12 through 13, where Abraham starts wandering around again. He feels threatened by a pagan king, and so he tells Sarah, like, all right, we're going to do the brother-sister act again so I don't get killed. Lo and behold, Sarah gets abducted again because she's still a looker at like 99. Something interesting in the story, something to aspire to, I guess. But yeah, we'll end there for today, and we'll pick up with chapter 20 tomorrow.